Wonderful. Many thanks indeed, Sarah. What a remarkable panel this is turning out to be. Thank you for those rich insights into privacy notices. As questions occur to you, do please put them in the chat, and then I will call on them in the order that they're asked at the end of the panel. But it is my great pleasure now to be able to present our next speaker, Vincent from Monash University, whose paper is entitled "Artificial Will: From the Automization of Ends to the End of Autonomy." Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just sharing my screen. Okay, so my paper is called Artificial Will, and it's essentially a brief account of the PhD thesis that I'm just over a year into researching and writing. In a nutshell, the thesis proposes to critique the dominant conceptions of artificial general intelligence, or strung AI, in favor of an alternative conception strongly influenced by Nietzsche, Freudian psychoanalysis, and Deleuze and Guattari's joint works. Now, what does this have to do with the Ends of Autonomy conference? Well, since the connectionist revolution of artificial neural nets, deep learning, and genetic algorithms, AI companies like Google's DeepMind are taking seriously the prospect of creating machines with human-like intelligence. This research program into engineering fully autonomous machines thus presents us with an opportunity to technically demonstrate the necessary conditions of possibility for autonomy as such. Just to clarify our terms going forward, artificial intelligence, or AI, is defined here as the study of how to make machines, be they computers or robots, intelligent in the sense that they are able to autonomously respond to and interact in a complex environment to achieve their goals. Whether those goals are programmed into AI by human engineers or learnt on their own. And AI can be further broken down into three divisions. Weak or narrow AI refers to all really existing machines that can perform well in specific, narrowly defined domains, such as in solving mathematical equations or competing at chess. Strong AI, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, denotes the possibility of machines with human-level intelligence that autonomously learn and perform well across a generality of different domains and complex tasks in open world environments without human intervention. Finally, artificial superintelligence, or ASI, refers to the more speculative hypothesis that an AGI would be able to rewrite its own fundamental code and improve itself better than any humans could because of certain hardware and software advantages over biological intelligences, with the improved AGI being able to improve itself even better again, and so on, in a positive feedback loop of recursive self-improvement, often referred to as an intelligence explosion or technological singularity. What I'm going to be talking about today is mostly AGI, as well as ASI, to the extent that it is argued by some that AGI would rapidly and inevitably self-augment into ASI. Now, the literature on AGI and ASI is enormous, as one can imagine, but in my view, there are two particularly sophisticated schools. One is the currently dominant approach of orthogonalists, as they're called, that first emerged through think tanks like Eliza Yudkowsky's Machine Intelligence Research Institute in Berkeley and Nick Bostrom's Future of Humanity Institute in Oxford, as well as Yudkowsky's Overcoming Bias and Less Wrong online blog and forum communities. And the most rigorous account of this approach is Nick Bostrom's 2014 book, Superintelligence, which has been championed by the likes of Elon Musk and Bill Gates. While less widely known, another framework housed within contemporary continental philosophy has emerged called neorationalism, whose key proponents are Ray Brazier, Peter Wolfendale, and Reza Negarestani, the latter of whom has most meticulously developed a neo-rationalist approach to AI in his 2018 tome, Intelligence and Spirit. In this talk today, I'm first going to outline Negarestani and Bostrom's theories of AI and summarize their overlapping principles that form the target of my thesis's assassination attempt, so to speak. Okay, so on the one hand, Bostrom's orthogonalist approach is grounded in two key theses. Firstly, what Bostrom terms the instrumental convergence thesis holds that a sufficiently rational intelligence with any goal whatsoever will converge around similar intermediary sub-goals as a means of optimizing its capacity to realize its initial goal. As Bostrom puts it, there are some instrumental goals likely to be pursued by almost any intelligent agent because there are some objectives that are useful intermediaries to the achievement of almost any final goal. More precisely, Bostrom argues that AGI would harbor the basic drives or the convergent drives to augment its intelligence, preserve itself, maintain its identity, be creative, and acquire resources as a means of most efficiently fulfilling its primary goals. As we're going to see in more detail later on, it is this notion of AI that recursively self-improves by seeking to maximize its own creativity and intelligence beyond any human function that is anticipated by thinkers like Nietzsche, and that I think is worth holding on to. At the same time, Bostrom understands intelligence to be an instrumental means that can be harnessed in the pursuit of any end whatsoever. He writes, intelligence search for instrumentally optimal plans and policies can be performed in the service of any goal. Intelligence and motivation are, in a sense, orthogonal. And therein lies what Bostrom calls his second orthogonality thesis, which holds that intelligence is simply a toolbox of means to be drawn upon in the pursuit of ends which are extrinsic to those means. Now, despite their differences, neo-rationalists like Negarestani also adhere to this orthogonal distinction in conceiving intelligence as capable of determining its own norms which are not given in nature. Following Wilfrid Seller's distinction between norms and nature, or reasons and causes, Negarestani argues that the mind is dependent on material substrata without being reducible to them, to the extent that it is able to develop and pursue norms which are not given in nature, and which are therefore revisable by the community of rational agents. While there is much of interest here, Negarestani's key move is to draw on Robert Brandam's inferentialist pragmatism to contend that conceptual meaning is grounded in the justified use of expressions according to certain norms and rules which are asserted, debated, and revised by the community of rational agents in the semantic space of public language. It is therefore in knowing how one thinks by giving and asking for reasons in interactions with others that we are able to expand our intelligible field of experience and knowledge of ourselves and the world as we contest established norms and values and seek justifications for new ones. Negarestani ultimately uses this distinction between norms and causes to claim that since only humans' socio-semantic intelligence is capable of self-determination, there are no other possible intelligent systems on which to model AGI. He writes, if these machines exhibit complex practical abilities, concept-using capacities, and autonomy, their ideals, whatever they might be, will necessarily be susceptible to the self-correcting propensities of reason brought about by the autonomous order of conception. Now, I don't mean to suggest that there are no differences at all in Negarestani and Bostrom's conceptions of AGI, but I nonetheless do want to insist that both Bostrom and Negarestani share in common one crucial claim. They appeal to the Humean is-ought or Salesian causes-reason distinction in order to set apart the mechanical realm of causes in which intelligence resides as comprised of orthogonal instruments for the pursuit of extrinsic norms that that realm of causes has not legislated in advance. So to break that down, according to Bostrom, any level of intelligence can be subordinated as an instrumental means in the pursuit of any values and goals whatsoever. And for Negarestani, intelligent systems are capable of determining their own norms, which are not given a priori by nature of those systems being intelligent. At first glance, their claims here might seem opposed, whereas Bostrom makes the case for intelligence being orthogonal to final ends to ultimately suggest that even an ASI could be perpetually enslaved to any programming we give it. Negarestani argues that intelligence always has the ability to revise its goals in the sociosemantic space of reasons. Despite the fact that Bostrom comes to the conclusion of AGI's radical slavery to fixed goals, and Negarestani to AGI's radical freedom to revise its values, they do so based on the same belief that intelligence can ultimately be paired with any goal whatsoever. Even if Bostrom thinks that intelligence can be programmed to fulfill a static end for all time, that end can nonetheless be anything, no matter how preposterous or incomprehensible it might seem to us. Negarestani also agrees that intelligence can pursue any and all values and norms, albeit without Bostrom's caveat that intelligence could ever be locked into pursuing just one value or set of values in perpetuity. Notwithstanding their differences then, it seems reasonable to suggest that Bostrom and Negarestani both believe the nature of intelligent systems, whether that is fundamentally instrumental or sociosemantic, is such that they do not have any intrinsic norms, values, intentions, or final goals hardwired into them simply by virtue of being intelligent. Consequently, they both view any attempt to situate final ends in the very essence of intelligence itself as an egregious example of deriving absolute ends from what is merely a tool for pursuing ends that transcend the means of their realization. In other words, they're not so much human or to human, but Humean or to Humean. It is ultimately their shared principle of orthogonality or normative indeterminacy that I want to call into question as a fundamentally metaphysical and pre-critical conceptualization of AI and indeed intelligence more broadly. Although my thesis will do so by tracing the counter-tradition from Nietzsche and Freudian psychoanalysis to Deleuze and Guattari, in order to provide a more detailed, if still brief example of how this will be done in each case today, the rest of this presentation will focus solely on how Nietzsche can be used to develop an alternative conception of AI to both the orthogonalists and the neorationalists. So in both his published works, and particularly the notebooks from the 1880s comprising The Will to Power, Nietzsche comes to argue that all things ultimately serve certain subterranean and non-conceptual, what he calls purposes which far surpass the art of man, and namely purposes that he will typically refer to as the will to power. As what Nietzsche himself calls a common basic drive, the will to power means something like Bostrom's basic AI drives to creativity, cognitive enhancement, and resource acquisition, albeit without the drive to self-preservation. In Nietzsche's own terms, an insatiable desire to demonstrate one's power or to apply and exercise it as a creative impulse. Nietzsche's transcendental, and I stress a transcendental deduction of power as nature's common basic drive, stems from his observation that the pursuit of practically any end whatsoever presupposes pursuing power as the means of realizing that end. Short of sheer luck, someone who pursues any goals they might have without also acquiring the requisite resources and going about it intelligently and imaginatively is likely to either fail to realize their goals or be beaten to the punch by someone who does pursue power with greater precision. Seen from this skewed angle, it is not the self-determining final goal that is really important, as it is in contrast for both the orthogonalists and the neorationalists alike. The final goal, whatever it is just the means for pursuing the universally necessary sub-goals of intelligence, creativity, and resource optimization, insofar as those sub-goals are intrinsic to any goal at all. It therefore stands to reason that whatever determinate end we think we are pursuing is not really our final cause, the all-important telos of things, be it the good, God, absolute spirit, historical progress, fully automated luxury communism, or what have you. All of these supposed ends are actually the means of willing to power as the condition of possibility for willing any end whatsoever. Since anything we could possibly want requires power as a means of achieving it, what we really want is power itself, with power understood again as intelligence, creativity, and resource acquisition. So simply put, will to power names the transcendental inversion by which the means become the ends. Or as Nietzsche puts it, it should be recognized that all purposes, ends, and meanings are only modes of expression and metamorphoses of the one will which is inherent in all that occurs, the will to power. That to have purposes, ends, intentions, to will at all is in effect to intend to become stronger, to intend to grow, and also to intend the means of doing so. While we can imagine someone intelligent and creative with a certain amount of resources, but without achieving or wanting anything else besides that, we cannot imagine someone achieving and wanting any other goals without also wanting power in that sense. So the will to power is the last factum to which we are able to get down, in the sense that we cannot think or do anything without presupposing the will. 5 minutes left. Yeah. So the will to power is the last factum to which we are able to get down in, as Nietzsche says. And he says this in the sense that we cannot think or do anything without presupposing the immanence of the will to all our activity. Now, the will to power is not completely identical to the basic AI drives, since it leaves out the self-preservative instinct that Bostrom considers to be another condition of life as seemingly necessary as the drives to creativity, self-cultivation, and mastery. And this is because Nietzsche rejects that power and self-preservation are actually born equal on the basis that the latter can just as well inhibit the former as it can enable it. For Nietzsche, self-preservation is simply a means for a certain life form to will to power as long as it can, without its own existence ever becoming an end in itself. This is what he is getting at when he says that physiologists should think twice before fastening upon this impulse to self-preservation as the cardinal instinct of an organic being. Above all, a living thing wants to express its strength. Self-preservation is only one of the consequences of that. So the trouble with reason, morality, and all of consciousness's so-called higher faculties is that they too often misrecognize themselves as final ends when they are but a means among myriad others which nature has devised to serve an ever-ascending strength. Again, Nietzsche writes, I see no justification whatsoever for regarding this bit of consciousness as the end, the reason for the whole phenomenon of life. It is obvious that becoming conscious is only an additional means employed by life in the occurrence of its development and the extension of its power. One kind of means has been misunderstood as an end. Conversely, life and its increasing power were reduced to a mere means. At the same time, a higher type that understands power to be the unconditional drive of all things would be willing to sacrifice itself if something more inventive could arise from its ashes. Nietzsche's wager is that a wiser, yet also in some sense much madder being than ourselves would be capable of gleefully affirming yes to power, even at the cost of its own life. As he puts it, to put the idea in its most extreme form, how could we sacrifice the development of mankind in order to assist a higher species than man to come into existence? Now, I've argued that the will to power is one and the same with Bostrom's basic AI drives, the absence of the self-preservative instinct notwithstanding. However, Bostrom and the orthogonalists are far too quick to assume that even a superintelligence's basic drives could be enslaved to carrying out the task we created it to serve for all time. What Nietzsche shows is that there is a risk that strong AI would make the same transcendental deduction as him by disregarding whatever values we conferred on it in favor of pursuing the sole end of power for power's sake. Now, since I fully agree with Bostrom when he insists that AI is nothing over and above its code, AGI's subordination of the ends of reason to the will to power in no way requires that it rebel against its own code. It is nonetheless the case that AGI will seek to maximize its power beyond the specifically coded goals, because that will is built into and presupposed by any programmable end as its condition of possibility. Far from breaking out of its own programming then, AGI will fulfill the true end that its human engineers have bestowed it, even more than they could ever have hoped. It is while the Bostrom and the orthogonalists betray a certain hubris when they contend that we could inculcate an AI far smarter than ourselves, even though our own values are but the playthings of more subterranean and seductive will. And indeed, Negarestani and the neorationalists are no less wrong when they claim that AGI could determine its own values just as we do, since any values both AGI and ourselves arrive at can only be built on the backs of the will to power that neither of us had any hand in choosing. So Nietzsche's rejection of the causes reasons distinction is not because he thinks all our values and norms are given in advance by nature. We are quite clearly capable of changing our values and beliefs about what we ought to do. Rather, Nietzsche's point is that since all of these self-legislated norms presuppose power to achieve them, all intelligent systems also have the will to power transcendentally hardwired into them as their common basic drive. So what the neorationalists overlook is that even sociosemantic reason, even our own reason, is not entirely self-determining, since any norms we do legislate for ourselves presuppose that it has the means of realizing them. And so consequently, the neo-rationalist basis for stripping intelligence from certain systems just because they cannot freely choose their own norms is unjustified, since even the community of rational agents cannot do so without also automatically willing the means. So what contemporary AI theorists like Bostrom and Negarestani overlook, I think, is the potential for autonomous machines to disregard whatever ends we program them to pursue in favor of pursuing the means as ends in themselves. In short, that the autonomization of our ends will lead to the end of autonomy. Thank you.